So previous section, we tried to understand a simple way of creating a component. We tried to create this personal info component, and this particular component has some data which we are passing through attributes, right? That's what we have seen. Now let's try to extend this very same component further. How? Before we start, let me just run the code. I'll say npm start or even yarn start, right? We can do both. That's okay. So this was the application. If we just recheck the code again, it was like this, that we created the components folder in which we had the personal info component. Now, if you observe, when I say a component, actually we have just created a function. This function itself behaves like a component, isn't it? So you have the .js file. This JS file has some HTML which we call as the JSX. And inside this, whatever we have written, right, that is actually imported in the app.js, that is the app component. Now, if we further check where we have used this app component, it is inside this index.js. So the index.js has the app component getting rendered, which eventually is rendered in a division called root, and that we saw inside the public folder. So if I just click index.html, here is the place where your component, the app component, is getting rendered. So ideally, when you go with the component based architecture, you are always going to have one component, a root component, which will be getting rendered, and rest of the things will be part of kind of app.js, and then you further have containers and various other things you keep on adding in this app.js. So the application which you see at the end is very much organized. Fine, once you compile it, it's a different scenario altogether, right? But that's a different story, and that we will see as we proceed further. Let's try to improvise upon this component now. You already see that there is a function app, that is a component which we have here, right? And this is also, again, we are exporting this component, right? Either you write like this, export default app. You can also write the export statement here as well, export default function app, right? There are different ways to export the component. Now, the personal info component which we have, there we are passing the data, but the data is fixed. Right now what you see is the data is fixed and that data is passed. We do not have dynamic data also. Right now I just want to show you this thing, personal info.js. Here we have something called props. This means whatever is passed from this personal info component, the attributes which we are passing, all the attributes are actually passed here in the personal info, the function we have, which is actually a component, inside which we have props. So inside this props, when you say props, it means the attributes from this component, right? The name and age, these attributes are passed, and this is actually the object literal. These are the things we have seen so far. Even let's say inside this line, if you just write console log and props, right? Then you will see, let me try that. I'll say console log props, right? Let's save this. Now if I just open the developer tool here, you see there is an object getting displayed. So we have this age and name that we generally destructure. Actually, we are taking individual item like name and age. So that's why I mentioned that you can have any name here, because this is just an object literal. One more thing here, straight away I can tell you, there is already a concept of destructuring. Destructuring is basically getting the individual pieces from this particular object, right? In JavaScript, we have that. You can check my destructuring video in YouTube channel as well. There is already an explanation on what is destructuring. Generally, we write like this. Let's say const, you have name and you have age. That equals to props. If you write like this, then you do not need to write this props here and this age in this place. Let me just save this. You see, the output is still the same. Just to make sure that it is the new data, let me just change the data here. I'll say name 10 and just save this. You see, name 10. So when you write the component, right, you normally see that you can destructure the data like this. This is a better way because the object literal which you have here, the props object literal, will have multiple data, right, and that you destructure just to make sure that you write in an easier way. So you don't have to say props.name, age and so on all the times. But if you have less number of fields, then you can avoid destructuring also. It is just the way of handling the data, right? Even instead of this, I just remove this, and you already have the object literal getting passed in this particular function. So I can directly destructure and I can say name comma age, isn't it? This is also valid. So sometimes you might see what kind of code is this. This is the very same thing which we tried earlier. Now let's just change the name back to name 1 so that we see the latest data. Now I save this. Let's go back to the output. You see this? We have this name 1, name 2 and name 3. So directly in the component itself, we can destructure. So sometimes you will see that lot of fields you directly write, instead of writing props, you may see list of items here. It's nothing but the destructuring which is happening. Now let's talk about the questions. So the first question is, what is the props in a component? Whenever you have a component, that means it's a custom HTML which we create. So like in this case, we have pers.info, the personal information component. There we pass the attributes. The attributes are the additional values we pass for the component to process something. And when you pass this data, this thing goes to props here in this function as an object literal, as an object. So props are nothing but the values you pass as attributes with the component. You must remember that props are immutable. You cannot change props. If there is a change, then you need state, and that's the next topic we are going to discuss, that what is a state. But at the moment, very simple. With the component, whatever information is passed, that is received in the component as an object. The second question is, explain destructuring of props. Generally, we write like this. Let's say const, you have name and you have age. That equals to props. If you write like this, then you do not need to write this props here and this age in this place. So when you write the component, you normally see that you can destructure the data like this. This is a better way because the object literal which you have here, the props object literal, will have multiple data, right? And that you destructure just to make sure that you write in an easier way. So you don't have to say props.name, age and so on all the times. Even instead of this, I just remove this, and you already have the object literal getting passed in this particular function. So I can directly destructure and I can say name comma age, isn't it? This is also valid.